real quick, if you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. Also, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Campfire Cult Pod for free. It'll really help us reach listeners just like you. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. And finally, if you don't mind, please share, rate, and review wherever possible. Welcome, dear listener, to the Campfire Cult Podcast. From a camper van deep in the haunted woods, I bring you first-hand accounts of chilling encounters with the paranormal. Step into the night and take a peek into the realm where reality and the supernatural collide. My name is Jazz, and I'll be your host. Welcome back, campers. I want to give a quick heads up that I'll be taking a break for the next few weeks to produce some more episodes along with some new kinds of content. I also want to let you know that once we're back from the break, the only place you'll be able to find the new episodes will be at Campfire Cult Pod on our YouTube channel and on Patreon for more continued extended and bonus content. So, if you could do me a huge favor and head on over to YouTube and give us a follow, that would be amazing. I know some of you won't be happy with this transition, but I believe it's the best place for the podcast going forward. I've been wanting to consolidate our streams into a single platform for a while, and I'm going to take this break to do it. I really think this will be a great path forward for the podcast, and it'll help me deliver more video content in the near future, which I really want to do. I've got a few in-person interviews lined up for when the weather gets nicer and I can travel to them, and I also want to do some on-location storytelling that I think will be really fun. Anyway, enough of this pre-ramble. Let's get into the episode. Tonight, we're taking a deep dive into a topic that often sends chills down my spine. A chilling phenomenon that has left witnesses questioning the very nature of what lurks in the woods. Tonight, we're covering the encounters with the enigmatic mimic. Imagine hearing your name echo from a tree line or a haunting cry of a baby only to find nothing there. From all across the world, these stories share one unsettling thread. Something out there is mimicking human voices, calling you closer, pulling you away from safety, and wants you to come find it if you dare. So gather close, stay sharp, and let's explore the unnerving encounters with the mimic. Up first, a terrifying encounter with a mysterious stranger at a bonfire in Utah.
4 days ago, I went to a bonfire with a couple of my co-workers. It wasn't a huge gathering, just a small get-together with about 7 people. I knew everyone there, and for the first hour, it was super fun. The location was out in the woods with barely any cell reception. We were about a mile away from civilization, so if anything happened, it would be hard to get help. I live in Utah, where there isn't much traffic around where I live, so we wouldn't see many cars. What's odd is that I knew everyone there but one person. I paid no attention to this at first, assuming he was a friend of one of my co-workers. He was a tall, skinny white guy with black hair and blue eyes. He was distant, barely spoke, and kept to himself, which I didn't find odd at first. As the night went on, I noticed he would randomly stare at people, which started to feel off to me. Before asking anyone who he was, I began observing him. His movements were very strange. I don't know how to explain it, but he moved oddly, with strange walking and weird neck and head movements. Kind of like a newborn baby. No real control or coordination when moving. This started to make me paranoid, so I asked all my co-workers if they knew him. One by one, they all said no, assuming he was someone else's friend. This was the breaking point for me. Something in me told me to get out of there immediately. I told my co-workers what I observed, and they all agreed to leave and head to another co-worker's house. We packed up our things and loaded them into the cars, acting like we were done for the night. The strange man didn't get into any car. He just stood near the woods and waved goodbye, As we drove away, my colleague and I looked back, but he was gone. That wasn't the scariest part. My car window was broken, so I could hear everything outside clearly. On the way to my place, I occasionally heard what sounded like someone screaming. At one point, I swear I heard someone call my name.
Daniel.
My friend and I were terrified. Instead of joking about the situation, we were gripped with fear. I felt something was making those noises to make me stop the car and lure me into the woods. As we left the gravel road and moved onto the main road, I looked back into the woods. Being in the last car, I had a clear view of something running across the gravel road. It was tall, skinny, pale, and moved way faster than any human should. I panicked, speeding past all the other cars. My friend in the passenger seat asked what was wrong, but I couldn't respond. I was so terrified that I almost drove into the woods at one point. I only snapped out of it when one of my friends called, asking what had happened. I lied and told him everything was fine, but he didn't believe me and kept pressing for answers. I kept lying until he eventually gave up and said he'd see me at my house. This experience has left me terrified to go near the woods. Sometimes I'm even scared to leave my house. I believe that if my instincts hadn't told me to leave, someone at that bonfire could have died.
Next, while growing up in Virginia, a woman encountered something whispering her name and mimicking her dog.
When I lived in the tri-state area of Virginia, I had many strange experiences in the woods surrounding the property where I grew up. Now that I'm older, I'm realizing just how weird these experiences were. Two of these experiences stand out in my mind as especially bizarre. The first experience occurred while I was wandering in the woods across from my house. I loved exploring and finding things like old bottles, rocks, and whatever else caught my attention, just typical kid stuff. However, I noticed multiple large piles of bones in the woods. I assumed they were left by a hunter who had discarded the carcasses. As it started getting dark, I headed back home. On the way, I heard something behind me whispering my name. My name. The voice was raspy and broken in a strange, unsettling way. I started running toward the house, panicked. I could hear footsteps following me to the edge of the woods. There was a road between my house and the woods, and when I turned around, I saw a dark shadow darting back into the trees. The second incident was scarier for me because I was older and remember it more clearly. It was late at night during summer break, and my mom wasn't home because she was staying at a party for a few days. I was spending the night on the computer watching YouTube. At some point, I got up to grab a drink from the kitchen. On my way back, I heard my pet bloodhound scratching and howling outside the door, wanting to be let in. Our house was fenced in, so when I let her out, I'd close the door and wait for her to scratch to come back in. I didn't remember letting her out that night, but I figured I had forgotten. As I was about to unlock and open the door, I heard growling behind me. I suddenly remembered I had already let her back in earlier that evening, before dark. My bloodhound and my other dogs were standing behind me, growling at the door, looking ready to attack. I noticed the scratching had stopped, but the howling became distorted, very broken and raspy. Whatever was outside ran off. I tried to look out the window to see what it was. All I saw were two yellow eyes staring back at me from the woods. Nowadays, I might chalk these experiences up to a vivid imagination. However, I have aphantasia and can't vividly imagine things, making these events even more unsettling.
Up next, while at her remote cabin in Maine, a woman hears a voice eerily mimicking her, calling her dog from the woods.
I'm a 20-year-old female living in Maine, and this occurred 2 years ago. Every summer, my family and I go up to camp in Ellsworth, Maine. The camp is about a 3-hour drive from my house. The camp itself is about an hour from the nearest town. I've been going to this camp my entire life. I have never had an incident like this happen before. I was watching TV in the middle of the night. Both of my brothers and my parents had gone to bed, and I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. I realized that the dogs needed to go outside to do their business. So I took my brother's 2 pit bulls and my Affenpinscher, a tiny dog, outside after turning on the porch light. I walked around to the front yard and let the dogs off leash. It's so incredibly dark in the woods in Maine that the porch light really only illuminated the porch and nothing else. I tried to keep an eye on the dogs. I was momentarily distracted when I saw a loon not too far from me on the lake. When I looked back, I saw that the pit bulls were both looking at something in the woods. I couldn't see what it was, but I assumed they'd seen a squirrel or a raccoon. I realized I didn't see Alfie anywhere. Alfie is an awfully small dog, and she's completely black. I called for her a few times and heard some soft whimpering right where the dogs had been looking earlier. I took a couple of steps in that direction and called for her again, worried that she may have gotten her paw stuck between the rocks or stuck in a snake hole. Suddenly, I felt something moving behind me. I whipped around and looked down, and it was Alfie. She'd been staying close to me the whole time, and I just hadn't seen her. I started thinking, if Alfie is here, what the hell is in the woods? I took another step forward, and the pit bulls began to growl. They were slowly advancing and were now on either side of me, looking right into the blackness of the woods. I quickly picked up Alfie and began to back up, very slowly. I wasn't sure what I thought was there, but there are lots of animals in Maine. I figured the dogs knew better than I did since I couldn't see anything. Right as I turned around, I heard the most bone-chilling thing I've ever heard in my life. Coming from the direction of the woods, I heard something or someone call Alfie's name. In my voice.
Alfie. Alfie, come here.
It was trying to mimic me, but it was just wrong sounding. The voice sounded really distorted. I freaked out and ran inside with the dogs. I have no idea what was out there in the woods. My camp is essentially a log cabin overlooking a lake. Our nearest neighbor, who is also family, lives at least a half-mile in the opposite direction of where the thing was. Does anyone have an idea what this could be?
Wow, that's so interesting and terrifying. I personally love going on nighttime walks and used to walk through a wooded trail in a nature preserve by my house. The most terrifying thing was when my dog would stop and stare directly into the pitch black beyond the headlamp and start growling. Makes the hair on my arm stand up just thinking about it now. There are a lot of black bear, deer, elk, and cougars in Washington, so I always assumed it was one of them. But even with a high-powered headlamp, I could never see far enough into the woods to see what caught my dog's attention. Coming up next, a woman in Finland hears something human-like mimicking a crow call, a child's cry, and eventually strange whistling, sparking both fear and curiosity.
About 2 weeks ago, I experienced something that sounds like it could have been a skinwalker, or at least something similar. I'm a 28-year-old female, living in the Finnish countryside. As the Finnish summer is quite short, I tend to spend as much time outdoors as I can. This happened one July afternoon, when I was laying on my ancient sun lounger, playing Pokemon and just enjoying the warm weather. I could hear a crow cawing somewhere to my left, not too far away. There was nothing unusual about that, since there are a lot of crows, especially hooded crows, in my area. But what I heard next made me raise an eyebrow. It sounded like a human was trying to mimic a crow's caw in a rather amusing way. Normally, I would have thought that it was our eccentric next-door neighbor, but the house was put on sale not too long ago, and no one was supposed to be living there. I shrugged it off and got back to my game. Probably less than 5 minutes later, I heard something that gave me goosebumps. A little girl screaming. It was a high-pitched scream that came from the same direction. I was starting to get a little creeped out at this point and put down my game to focus on listening. Then, I heard another sound. Whistling. Again coming from the same direction. I don't know how to explain this well, but it sounded a little like half whistling, half screaming. It made me think if the sound I had heard before wasn't a little girl screaming, but someone whistling. The whistles continued in short 5-second bursts, now sounding more and more like a whistle rather than a scream. I don't know what made me do this. Maybe it was the absurdity of the situation, but I whistled back. The whistling went on for maybe 1 more minute and then stopped completely. I never went to investigate what it might have been, but now I kinda wish I had.
Next, a woman living in the Ozarks encounters a mimic coming from deep in the forest.
I live in the Ozark Mountains on 63 acres of land, about 20 minutes from both towns near me. My house was originally a cabin built in the 1800s that someone had built onto. I don't have much more knowledge of the house because all the paperwork burned in a courthouse fire. Weird shit has always happened in and around the house, but those are stories for a different time. Last year, around February, I had a huge argument with my husband and decided to go hike up the mountain to cool off. My husband went to work on his Jeep, and my 5 dogs and I went up the mountain. Normally, my dogs run around through the trees, but always keep me in their sights. This time, they stuck very close to me. I noted it and assumed it was because they knew how upset I was. We made it to the clearing, and it just seemed so still up there. I felt a little uneasy, but ignored it. and climbed up our deer stand. I sat up there for about 20 minutes, took some pictures, and looked down to see my dogs at the base of the tree. They were standing in different directions in alert stances. The feeling of dread washed over me. I scrambled down the deer stand and walked across the clearing with the dogs in tow. I did not want to run because we have predators out here. All of a sudden, I could hear loud whistling. I stopped in my tracks. My dogs were now on high alert and all staring behind me to the left. My husband's voice came from the same direction as the whistles, screaming my name like something was wrong.
Jessica.
But everything seemed off about it.
Jess, help.
Maybe something in the voice wasn't exactly right. I cannot describe the fear that came over me. I continued to walk down the mountain and went over to my husband to ask him what was wrong. He looked at me confused and told me he had no idea what I was talking about. I kind of forgot about this moment until today. I woke up to loud whistling outside of my house around 4:40 to 5 a.m. It was the same whistle I used to call my dogs home, but parts of the whistle were wrong. All of my dogs were inside and my husband was still asleep. Part of me told myself to go check it out, but a loud voice in my head said to stay in bed. I listened to the voice. No telling what would have happened had I gone outside. I still live here and hope I never hear it again.
Up next, while outside late one night, a man hears a woman's voice calling to him from the darkness.
This happened while my pregnant wife and I were staying at my parents' house in Northwest Tennessee on September 17th, 2021. Their house is about 50 yards from our new house. Around 12 a.m., I went out on their back patio to get some air. Over the fence, I heard something that sounded like it was choking on something, but also like a distorted pig squealing. The sounds came in 2 to 3 second spurts. I initially thought it might be a hawk, an owl, or something explainable. Although I found it weird, I assumed it was probably natural. About 3 hours later, I couldn't sleep and decided to go to the gym. While walking to my car, I heard the same weird sound from about 50 yards away at my 10 o'clock direction. I looked around, but couldn't see or hear anything unusual. Suddenly I heard,
Hey! Hey!
in a woman's voice coming from the same direction. I looked again, but saw nothing. As I scanned the yard, I heard the loud, squealing noise again. Panicked, I got in my car and drove away as quickly as possible. I thought the experience was strange, but didn't dwell on it until about a month later. While scrolling TikTok, I saw a video of a man riding a horse in Arizona. In the video, a woman's voice said, "Hey, hey," which caused the man and his horse to freak out and run away. The video suggested the voice could have been a skinwalker. Hearing that same voice and those exact words made my heart sink. I don't believe in these things, and I've tried to disprove it every way I can, but I haven't been able to. It doesn't scare me as much anymore as it intrigues me. I'm deeply curious to know what it was and why it happened to me.
Next, two brothers, while exploring a barn at 3 a.m., have a run-in with the unknown.
I've never really believed in this stuff, to be honest. And I still don't know if what I heard was anything paranormal, a goat or a person, but it still freaks me out. My family lives on about 5 acres of land. To our left, we have neighbors who live on a hill on about 10 acres. To our right, there is a huge barn where a guy who owns a big construction company stores some of his equipment. The barn is probably a good 90 yards away from my family's house. There are no streetlights or lights at all in between my house and the barn. When this barn first got built, I was about 15 and my little brother was 13. We were both pretty interested in it because it was huge and at this time completely empty. With no plan, we decided it would be a good idea to go check it out at 3 in the morning. It was a terrible idea. We walked down to the barn with our Great Pyrenees, who was an absolute unit. The walk to the barn wasn't scary, and we made it there without anything weird happening. The barn is lit all around it, so you can see everything around it from about a 20-foot radius. Bryce and I were just walking around. We brought a football and were tossing it around and having fun. I remember locking Bryce in the porta potty and not letting him out, just having a good time like brothers do. After about 7 minutes or so, Bryce and I were both at the front of the barn on the gravel path, just talking.
Hey!
We heard a noise pretty far off in the distance. It was a very weird noise, though, like a girl saying, "Hey!" But very strangely, Bryce and I both stopped talking and looked in the direction of the noise. I wasn't really scared at this time. It was a high-pitched noise, and it didn't sound like it came from something menacing. It was pretty far away, too. It became completely silent, and Bryce and I just stared into the dark abyss. 30 seconds later, the noise was about 10 yards away. It was right outside of the lit-up part of the land, so we couldn't see it, but it was right there. It sounded like a woman yelling, "Hey!" in panic, but it also didn't sound human. It was absolutely terrifying. I turned around and booked it, yelling, "Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit," absolutely surging with adrenaline. So was Bryce. It was the fastest I've ever run in my life. As I was running, I heard the, "Hey!" 2 more times. I looked back, but there was nothing in the lit-up area. I have no clue what it was.
Coming up, while exploring the wilds of Utah, a group of overlanders has a run-in with a mimic.
Me and 5 of my buddies were out in Utah back in 2017. I had my brand new 4Runner with me, and some of my buddies drove a Jeep and a Tacoma. We're all gun guys, so we were all carrying that weekend. Around 2:45 a.m., one of us heard the sound of someone screaming, so my buddies started waking everybody up. The sound continued from a distance, and after a few seconds, it sounded really close to us. Here's the weird part. Whatever it was either fast or there were at least 4 of them. At first, we thought it was some 4-legged animal, but we had never heard anything like it before. It wasn't making the noise simultaneously, so we became confused about whether there were multiple of them or just one, but it was coming from all different directions. Then my buddy had enough of it. He grabbed his pistol and fired 2 very loud shots into the air. The sound stopped for a good minute, then it started again from another direction, this time even closer. He shot 2 more rounds in the air but got no reaction. When I finally grabbed my nods from my pack and started looking around with assisted IR light, I saw nothing. Then the most bizarre thing happened. Whatever it was started mimicking the sound of the gunshots multiple times from one location to another. The mimicry wasn't perfect, but we could tell it was imitating the sound, just not as loud. We decided to leave our site after that, and one of us suggested it could be people messing with us because they didn't want us in the area for some reason, but like I said, I saw no one when I had my nods on. I think he was just trying to come up with a rational explanation, something to this day I cannot.
Next, a grad student encounters a mimic of her injured dog in the woods, testing her courage and instincts in a chilling face-off with the unknown.
I live in the North Dakota, Minnesota area, and between towns there are large sections of flat farmland. I live in town because I'm getting my master's in microbiology and don't have the cash to move to a private area. My friend's family, however, lives in the rural part of the region. I visit her house almost every Friday, and we spend time doing art, reading, or playing old and quirky video games. I generally hate leaving at night because it always feels like I'm being watched, even though we're in the middle of nowhere. My dog doesn't help ease this feeling. I usually rely on my dog for comfort as I have anxiety and depression, and she is registered as an emotional support animal, trained to comfort me, not like the untrained ones that just wear the tag to get free rent. She's a genuinely good dog, but as she's well trained, she doesn't react with fear like I sometimes wish she would. In March, I took her to the dog park where she tore a ligament in her knee. This injury left her with a heavy limp, a strict medication regimen, and the need for me to carry her upstairs and help her frequently. I was considering tightrope surgery for her, a $1,500 procedure, because her knee was clicking, and she's my dog, my responsibility. Morgana is usually off-leash unless we are in town, something I changed after this encounter. One night, around 1 a.m., I needed to get home to feed my lizard and go to bed. I was loading my car with all my things, laptop, backpack, food, and books, when I noticed Morgana walking into the woods surrounding the house. She was limping and panting, and I felt uneasy because it was pitch dark, my dog was injured, and we were in the middle of nowhere. I hurried to load everything into the car and used my phone's flashlight to follow Morgana to an old, collapsed building on the property. My flight response was in overdrive. The hair on my neck was standing up, and I considered running back inside, but couldn't leave her. Suddenly, something walked out from behind the collapsed building. It looked exactly like Morgana, complete with her 2 collars, but there was one glaring difference: absolutely no limp. The figure moved with an easy, confident stride, completely unlike Morgana's wobbly, uneasy, and painful-looking steps from her injury. We stared at each other. It didn't even wag its tail. It just stared back at me. I told the figure, "You're not Morgie." I was sure of it. It cocked its head at me, then turned and walked back to the shed. Seconds later, the real Morgana came limping and panting from the other side of the building, acting just like the dog I've had for 6 years. I instantly checked for a small scar under her fur to confirm she was my dog. Once I was certain, I picked her 84-pound butt up and ran to the car. I still visit my friend's house and bring Morgana, but I leave earlier now and keep her on a lead. I still feel like I'm being watched when I'm out there, and I occasionally see things out of the corner of my eye. I understand there are scientific explanations for these feelings. I'm a graduate student, after all. But my mother, uncle, and grandmother have shared their own similar stories of eerie encounters in this area of the country. Maybe I'll have one of them write in sometime as well.
For our final story of the evening, a New Jersey mom hears a baby crying and her name called out to her from outside her house close to the wood line.
I live in a small town right on the bay in New Jersey. We have woods bordering the edge of our town and some of our beach. I live about 6 blocks away from our beach near the woods leaving town. Since the beginning of this year, I have been hearing something outside my house. My fiancé and I have a bedroom on the 2nd floor of our house, connected to our 1-year-old son's bedroom. My mother-in-law lives with us because she is bedridden, and her room is on the 1st floor on the other side of our house. I have severe insomnia that keeps me up all night. I don't take meds for insomnia because they make me groggy for days afterward. At first, the noise sounded like a baby crying, and I would immediately get up to check on the baby. This went on for weeks. I would hear the crying at random hours throughout the night. My mother-in-law started commenting about how our poor little boy wasn't sleeping through the night. Finally, I'm happy I wasn't the only one hearing it. It wasn't our neighbors because one has a teenage daughter, and the rest are elderly. A couple of months ago, I started hearing my name being called out and noticeably coming from outside.
Katie.
It wasn't a voice I recognized, so I immediately checked the cameras we have outside. There was nothing on the camera, but I kept hearing my name a few more times.
Katie, help.
My fiancé finally heard it and got upset, wondering who was outside calling my name in the middle of the night. He checked the camera and saw nothing, figuring they were out of the camera's range. He decided to go outside to make them leave. I followed him with a flashlight, curious to see who would try this in the middle of the night. No one was there. I shined the flashlight all around the backyard and up and down our driveway. I saw the reflection of something's eyes through the windows of his truck. It's been freaking me out because lately I've been hearing the sound of a baby crying and my name being called more and more, and now always coming from outside. Maybe the cries always were. This happens not just at night anymore. The last couple of weeks I've been having scary nightmares. In the dreams, something gets into the baby's room and blocks the door so I can't get in. By the time I manage to open the door, my son's room is torn apart and he's not there. These dreams are so bad that I wake up in a panic attack and run to my son's room to make sure he's still there. I really needed to get this off my chest. I want to be clear. None of the dreams or voices I've heard belong to my 10-year-old son.
Katie.
I can't even imagine how this would feel as a parent hearing a baby crying from outside. How do you not go out and check on it like they did, even with how wildly absurd it is that your newborn would be outside crying? Stories like these are just wild to me. I really want to see a Bigfoot or a dogman someday, but hearing something mimic a loved one, friend, or even a baby crying, I could honestly do without that experience. And with that said, that's all for tonight, dear listeners. Unless you are a Patreon cult member, where I've got a few more tales of the mimic to keep you up at night. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. And just one more quick reminder before we go. Once we're back from the break, the only place you'll be able to find the new episodes will be at Campfire Cult Pod on our YouTube channel and on Patreon for more continued extended and bonus content. If you could head on over to YouTube and give us a like, follow, and subscribe, that would be amazing and really helpful in this next chapter of the Campfire Cult podcast. Until next time, I'll be leaving you in the dark where whispers linger and shadows dance. Stay wary, sleep well, and beware the mimic in the night. If you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. You can follow us anywhere on social media at Campfire Cult Pod and online at campfirecultpod.com. And finally, if you don't mind, please rate and review wherever possible.